Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a special afternoon episode of the show about the show. As always, I am Devlin Clark, the creator and host of the show about the show. This is episode 13, so I have not yet been kicked off the air, so that is good. So episode 13 today, I am so incredibly honored and ready to talk to Brandon Warne. He is part of the Zone Coverage website. He has a daily Minnesota Twins podcast called Locked On Twins, which is amazing. And you can also find him writing for The Athletic. He is also a dad, like myself, and a wrestling fan. We're going to be talking a lot of Twins in the next 60 minutes, specifically about the steal of a trade that they made for Jake Odorizzi, what they gave up, how it helps them the most, and what Brandon and I think are the key moves in the offseason. We're also going to touch on some of the Hall of Fame stuff. We'll get into a little bit of WWE, and then we're gonna have a little bit of fun with a show that we both love, which is The Office, and we're going to see which Twins players would be Office characters. So without any further ado, as always, this episode and this entire podcast is dedicated to my dad, who taught me to love baseball. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brandon Warne. How you doing, bud?
Hey. Good. What's up? How are you?
Doing well. So I wanted to kind of start today, talk about how you kind of got into the position that you're in terms of the coverage and access that you have of the Minnesota Twins.
Well, I got a journalism degree at the University of Northwestern in St. Paul in 2010. From there, I kind of interned at a bunch of different places and was lucky enough to score one with Baseball Prospectus, which is one of the fully inclined websites that people may or may not know about. It's just like Fangraphs and some of those, Baseball Think Factory from maybe a decade ago or whatever. And so from there, I interned. I worked real hard doing that, and then became a semi-regular columnist for them, and had a press pass to Target Field in 2010, kind of figured out what that was all about, and realized that was something I really wanted to pursue on a regular basis. And so from there, I jumped to Fangraphs. Fangraphs has enough of a stronghold in the marketplace for baseball that they give press passes for there as well. And so I kind of, between all the places I was writing, I was doing like Q&As and that kind of thing, just getting to learn how to talk to players and ask them questions that were both, good to get good answers, but also just not offensive or not dumb, and just kind of teaching myself the ins and outs of the business while asking some of the people that were at the stadium every day how to kind of go about my business. And then from there, I just kind of had to work hard and hope people would notice. And eventually somebody did. 1500 ESPN gave me my first regular beat doing Twin stuff. I was at the stadium all 81 games that year. And then after that year, they decided to cut their budget. And when they hired a new senior editor, it was a guy who also did baseball, and so they didn't need me anymore. And so I kind of floundered for a year trying to figure out what was next. And then Tom Schreier, who's in charge of zone coverage back then, was calling it Cold Omaha, and he said, well, we're trying to build something here, and if you're interested, we'd really like to have you. And so I, absent any other options, took him up on that, and I had to work a lot there for free, which was a very hard pill to swallow, but at some point, too, you have to realize what your value is and, hope that the future holds something better for you. And now I get a regular paycheck from there, and I cover for them. And The Athletic called me up and asked me to write some stuff for them. And then Locked On decided they needed a Twins podcast and picked up the phone and asked me to. And so, as long as you work hard and treat people the right way, I can't say it'll always open doors for people, but you put yourself in the best situation possible and see what happens.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit specifically about kind of each of those ventures. You mentioned kind of how you got into things, but talk a little bit about the zone coverage, which is, known as Cold Omaha.
So Tom basically had this idea that that there needed to be a sports website in town that covered all teams, but was, run just a little differently than everywhere else. And so he went to his dad and basically said, I want to start a company. And his dad said, okay, well, show me that it's viable and we'll fund it for you and we'll find ways to make it, feasible to make it a career thing. And so that's basically what they've done. And they've turned it into a podcasting place, a media place, writing, all different facets of media coverage for sports. And I don't know if the future holds more entertainment, more, wrestling or TV or music or what, but they do high school stuff now. They do links, which not a lot of the sites give a lot of coverage to the links, which is unfortunate. We're trying to expand Gophers coverage all the time. We did football this last year, but it'd be nice if we could get out to maybe the girls basketball team or the women's basketball team, because they're just awesome this year. They've beaten, I think, 3 top 25 teams, so coming off beating Maryland the other night. And so I don't know. I mean, it's just the idea that with media being such a hard field to crack, there are so many qualified people who are not getting chances. And it's a little bit like The Athletic in that The Athletic is trying to create the best possible media company for the money. What we're trying to do is just to create the best possible media company with the talent that's available and maybe has been shut out by more traditional outlets for any reason, whether it's because we're too young or maybe we're still needing some polish or something in the industry. And so we're just trying to give people opportunities. And, it's been really good for me. I've become a better editor, better writer, a better podcaster, better communicator, better on videos. Everything is a learning experience, and if you treat it that way, you'll become better at whatever you're trying to do.
For sure. Let's switch gears here a little bit. So after the zone coverage thing happened, you made an announcement that you touched on briefly there, that The Athletic, which is kind of sort of, I guess you could maybe say like an independent style website, called you up and asked you to write for them. But then they started getting really big names. Michael Russo from the Star Tribune switched over there. And you write.
That's who called me.
How crazy is it to know that you work for the same company and you write for the same publication that Peter Gammons and Ken Rosenthal write for?
I mean, it's extremely humbling. It's extremely, I don't even know what the word is. It's just you never really think about it. I remember when I was a little kid looking at baseball cards, and it would be like Peter Gammons picks or something. I don't remember what it was, like 1992, 93 cards where it'd be like Peter Gammons diamond something or other, and it was like he'd ask the players he'd picks to break out or whatever. And you just you feel so far away from that. 92, 93, when I'm 7 or 8 years old, growing up in a town of 3,000 people on the border of Canada, your dreams can't feel further away when you're young, especially, or if you grow up in a small town or, grow up in an area where people just kind of grow up and either stay there or they go to college and come back. And so, I don't know, it's just, you can exceed your wildest dreams in some ways, but it just doesn't feel real, or sometimes you don't sit down to reflect about it. And I feel like maybe I won't even do that until many years from now, maybe after Peter's long gone. Who knows where I go from here, whether I get a full-time job in the media, or if I just keep doing this forever, it's a good enough living that I can make that work with my wife and, with our daughter. I mean, I'm happy where I'm at. I'm going to continue working, and I assume that will help me go further. But if things stop happening for me, because it's still just so humbling and so exciting to know, though, that someone along the line regarded me well enough to give me this kind of chance. It's really, really unbelievable.
Now, one of the people that you work with there is Ken Rosenthal. Have you ever just emailed him and asked him for like a picture of his bow tie collection? Because that guy's got a legendary bow tie collection.
I haven't. I'm really waiting for the chance to meet him. And what helps is when your team that you cover is more relevant. So obviously I've covered the Twins for some pretty rough years, 2013 15, and then again, 15 was okay. I mean, those years they won, I think, 83 games. But 13 and 16 were especially difficult. This last year they were good, but I don't think anybody believed in them. When you start getting good, that's when you get the national games. So you get guys like Buster Olney in town or John Shambi. I met John Shambi. He's known as Boog in the ESPN circles, the redheaded guy that does the national games on radio. And just a wonderful, wonderful guy that I've now, now he'll text me and ask me about the Twins when they're coming to town, or when he's coming to town to do a game, and say, hey, what do you know about, this guy? And I can help him with his prep, which is just, it's unbelievable. And so when the national types come to town, it's when your team is good. And so hopefully this year is the kind of year where Ken Rosenthal and Fox Sports come in for a Saturday game, and maybe I can meet him. But Buster was in town. I was too intimidated to go say hi to him. It was 2013. I think Cleveland clinched at Target Field. I want to say it was the year Jason Kubel was traded to the Indians for the last month of the year. And so I was just too intimidated. Buster sat behind me for the entire game. I didn't even say a peep to him. And so that was me learning my lesson. These guys aren't that scary. Just go up and talk to them. And John followed me back on Twitter within an hour, and we chat now. And so it's amazing. And I'm hoping that Kenny makes his way to town so I can ask him about the bow ties, because they're obviously very meaningful too. He'll do things for charities, important things like diabetes or all kinds of stuff. So he seems like a really, really great guy who does more than just baseball stuff to occupy his time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny that you kind of talk about being intimidated by guys, because I've been a big ESPN Baseball Tonight fan, as I'm sure you have, for many, many years. I played the game when it was back on, I think, the Sega back in the 90s, because we're about the same age. And I was at a game in 2014. It was a nationally televised game over 4th of July weekend against the Yankees. And ESPN's there, and I'm kind of down, and I'm talking to Wetmore and bothering him, and I'm talking to some players and stuff, and all of a sudden, and I have a 2014 All-Star Game program, and I see this little guy with a really high-pitched, nasally voice talking and just laughing and laughing and laughing, and it's Tim Kirkjian, and I figured it was him. Yeah, I love Tim Kirkjian, and I asked him if he would sign my program, and he's like, yeah, absolutely, and he posed for pictures, and I watched for the next probably 40 minutes every single ball that fans threw to him to sign. He caught it one-handed, sweet spotted it, and threw it back. I mean, the guy didn't drop a single thing, and he's wearing a suit, and people are making bad throws and everything, and he's catching every single one. So I understand that aspect of it, but it's a pretty cool aspect when you get to kind of see them that yes, they're also human beings in addition to being these big time media personalities.
Yeah, and most of them are not very intimidating. So, I mean, there's probably some that aren't the most personable, or where they just want their space, and that's totally within their right, but you'll never know until you ask, and you really don't need to take it personally if they want their space either. Absolutely.
Let's switch gears here and talk about the Locked On Twins podcast. Now, this is a podcast that's a daily podcast, and as somebody who does a podcast, I can't imagine doing a daily podcast about one team. How difficult is it to come up with things? I know on Twitter you put a lot of questions out there. How did that idea kind of come about to do a daily Twins podcast, and talk about being the co-host of that?
Well, so David Locke is a broadcaster for the Utah Jazz, so a natural play on his name is Locked On for his Locked On Sports Podcast Network. And Locked On Jazz, I think, is what he started. And then he realized he wanted to start a network, so we have Locked On Vikings, Locked On Timberwolves. And so then I thought, maybe they'll do baseball someday. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, this Twitter handle, Locked On MLB, follows me, and they start doing Locked On Cubs and Yankees. So I reached out and I said, hey, if you ever do Twins, just let me know. I mean, maybe I wouldn't be your first choice, but if I am, just, hit me up. And so they did that about a month ago, and we signed a deal. And so it's every weekday I'll say it hasn't been difficult, but this is only going to be episode number 7 that we record today, and so 7 days of material isn't too hard to come by. Fortunately, during that time, the Twins have, what have they done? They've traded for Jake Odorizzi. They've been in the mix for guys like Darvish. Now it sounds like they could have a chance at either Lance Lynn or Alex Cobb. So, I mean, they're giving us some material. People have been just awesome. You've participated as well in our Q&A stuff. I think your question is the first one that we'll answer when we record today after I get off this call. And so it's been just a wonderful response. Honestly, people like hearing their names on podcasts. I try to give away something as often as possible, whether it's a Twins prospect handbook or who knows, maybe I get my hands on a copy of a book that people want, whether it's Keith Law's Smart Baseball or I don't know. But when we are doing this daily show, if you have a co-host who you can bounce stuff off and have a good conversation with, that makes it really easy. Now, some of these guys do the shows on their own, and for me, that would just be really hard for me to be entertaining by myself. I do Midwest Swing with, a different guest every week, but sometimes getting that chemistry is a big deal. And so for me to find someone that I knew that I would have that chemistry with was important. And the first person that came to mind was a friend of mine, Ryan Turnquist, who and we just kind of met through Twitter about 4 or 5 years ago. And just a good kid, going to grad school for school counseling. So we have to work around that for his schedule a little bit. But I know his passion as a fan it rivals that of mine as a baseball fan and as a reporter to do a good job. And so when that fire is met by someone else's fire in a different but complementary angle, it makes for the best possible content that either person is capable of producing with their talent. And I think we've done a nice job so far, and hopefully it continues to grow. And I don't know how niche-specific a Twins daily podcast is or can be, so I don't know how big the ceiling is for something like that. But they wanted us to get 2 sponsors, and we already have one contract drawn up and another one that we're in the process of. So we may have our first 2 sponsors before we're 2 weeks in. I think that's a pretty good ground to have built upon.
Absolutely. And where can people find that podcast at?
So you can now follow it on iTunes, Locked On Twins. Give us a 5-star review, and we will be very happy. Otherwise, it's on zonecoverage.com or lockedontwins.com, or you can just find it at Brandon_Warne. I tweet the link probably twice a day, at least until we get started. I won't be quite so annoying about it after we've been, get a good subscriber base. But, I mean, the first 2 episodes were really well received, and we've continued to grow from there. So I'm pretty excited about the future.
Yeah, I've listened to them. They're great. You guys do a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch base and talk about the Twins. So obviously this week, a lot of news on the Twins. Let's start with the first news that we had. The Twins were out on Darvish. Darvish ended up signing a deal with the Cubs, 6 years. I want to say it was $126. I've been reading all over Twitter and Facebook that, same old Twins, they're cheap, this and that and the other, and I want to say that it's not so much that they're cheap. 5 years and $100 million, which was what the offer was reported by Rosenthal and Heyman and Doogie and all these other people. That's not cheap chump change at all. I think what it was that the Twins didn't want to go the 6th year. What's your analysis on the Darvish situation and signing?
Yeah, I mean, if 6 and 126 puts you at what, 21 million per. I'm guessing the Twins probably offered 5 and 105, which is also 21 million per. Usually the teams have a pretty good idea of what others are offering, and so if the 6th year is a sticking point, I would have found a way to make it an option based on innings. Because if the guy's healthy enough to throw innings for you, you're not going to have him going out there giving you a 5 or 6 ERA to the point where you're going to be upset if that 6th year vests. Pitcher health is obviously very difficult, especially 5 years in advance. And even look at the Anibal Sanchez contract. I mean, 5 years, $80 million to the Tigers. At his age, he was like 28 at the time. 5 years doesn't seem that prohibitive. He fell off in the last 3 years, so it's kind of a cautionary tale. And then the Twins went ahead and signed him. So showing this kind of restraint is not the worst thing. I don't know that I would have given the opt-out, and I think that would have been tough, and maybe that's the sticking point for the Twins, is, we want to make sure you're going to be around for longer than 2 years, and the problem is if a player opts out, it's because they've given you value. If they opt in, it's because they haven't, and so that's undue risk for a team like the Twins. The Cubs, they apparently feel willing to take that risk again after they're probably going to get burnt by Jason Hayward in that same respect. So I think the game will move away from those eventually, and I don't think I would give one away if I was the Twins.
No, I agree completely. I was kind of surprised, and I've been telling people kind of all off season that if they're going to get Darvish, give him a 6th year, but make it either a player option, make it a team option, do it incentive laden. I think there were ways that the Twins could have done that, but didn't. So I totally agree with you on that. So then the news drops that, okay, the Twins are out on Darvish. They still need a starter. Saturday night, what happens? The Twins go out and trade for Jake Odorizzi from the Tampa Bay Rays. He had the Twins gave up Jermaine Palacios, I believe is what it is. He's a low-level minor league shortstop. The Twins are very deep at the shortstop position. Can we call this highway robbery? Because that's what it seems like it is.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when the Twins were kind of bad at these deals. They got Kevin Jepsen and ended up giving up Chi-Wei, who's probably going to be in the bullpen for the Rays this year. Jepsen is long gone from the Twins. And so those are the risks you take for these kind of deals. But the big thing with Odorizzi was that his value tanked at the worst possible time for the Rays. And like I tweeted, I think that the juiced ball came around at the worst possible time. They're not going to want to pay $6 million for a guy who last year was worth like 0.1 WAR by Fangraphs. And the home run ball was a huge issue. 1.88 home runs per 9 is an astronomical figure, even in light of the Rays level from the American League on the whole. I mean, the average home run rate for an American League starting pitcher last year was like 135. It's usually quite a bit lower than that. And so even in light of that, he's still well above that. And so the Twins are banking on that being a one-year aberration. He belongs to the cult of high fastballs, the spin rate stuff and all that. Yep. And so they're going to have to work through some stuff. But he'll play in front of a good outfield just like he did in Tampa. Hopefully it'll play a little bigger for him. I think that's what the Twins are hoping. And beyond that, I don't know. I mean, you take a chance on a guy who's been traded for not only Zach Greinke, but Wade Davis and James Shields. I mean, he's got the pedigree. He was a big-time prospect with the Brewers, with the Royals, and then came up with the Rays. I mean, this is a guy, hard to believe he's been traded 4 times already, and he's not even 30 yet. In fact, I think he turns 28 this year. And so it makes sense that the Twins hope that they can be the team that reworks a couple things with him. It also bodes well that Josh Kalk, their new pitching development guy, signed off on this deal when he spent the last, I think it was 8 years in Tampa. So he knows a lot about this guy. And it also might be interesting to see if the Twins do sign another pitcher, which seems to be on the radar a little more today than it was yesterday. Is it going to be Alex Cobb, who was with the Rays for a long time, again, very familiar with Josh Kalk, or is it going to be Lance Lynn, both guys on the other side of Tommy John surgery and working their way back to what are pretty impressive baselines of performance. Lance Lynn, legit number 2 starter in the NL, maybe a 3 in the AL, 3.20, 3.50 ERA every year. Cobb, when he's healthy, which has not been that frequent, very, very good number 2 in the AL East, but the changeup kind of betrayed him last year on his way back. So we'll see what happens, but I'm excited one way or the other. If they sign one of those guys, I think you're looking at a team that can threaten Cleveland for the division crown, let alone playing in the wild card game again.
I completely agree, and I think the biggest thing that the Odorizzi trade does is it gives the Twins a little bit more stability in the rotation. Obviously, I mean, I think right now you're looking at some combination of Berrios, Mejia, Odorizzi, Gibson, and fill in your number 5 starter. But I think it makes it a lot easier to swallow that pill, at least in April when they don't have Irvin Santana, when you only need a number 5 starter twice and you have a guy like Jake Odorizzi lined up number 2. And he might even be the opening day starter. You never know. I mean, he's got that pedigree. He's coming back off of 2 minor injuries last year. I read an article today that said he has been working out and doing Pilates to try and help his back and his flexibility going forward, which he kind of felt was something that, you know, he didn't blame the season that he had last year on injuries, but I think if you kind of, you know, you touched on his numbers, if you kind of look at his baseline numbers and dig a little deeper in Fangraphs and Baseball Reference, you can kind of clearly tell that he was hurt. Do you think, you know, moving forward, if he's healthy this offseason, he's a solid number 3?
I think his ultimate ceiling is a number 2. A number 3 is the more reachable ceiling. And for what they paid, they're okay with him rounding out the rotation. So there's lots of layers that the Twins are okay with here. Excuse me there. But if you listened to Locked On yesterday, we had a question that said, who would you compare him to as far as previous Twins pitchers? And do you have any idea who we said?
I haven't listened to yesterday's yet, no.
We're putting you on the spot here. Scott Baker. And so with Scott Baker, it was fly balls, strikeouts, didn't really walk too many batters. And so, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there about the show. I just was curious if you had thought about that as well. Scott Baker at his best, Scott Baker at his best was a really good pitcher. And to have a guy like that as your number 3 through 5, he can definitely help you.
Absolutely. So we, you know, and I think the other aspect of the trade, and it seems like the thing that the Twins have kind of been doing this year too, is, you know, kind of looking at some of these front office moves. They've been going outside of the lines and trying to get guys on multiple year contracts, and you don't see that from the Twins a lot. They signed Addison Russell 2 years, $16 million. That's the first time that the Twins have given a 2-year reliever or a 2-year deal to an outside, to a free agent reliever who didn't finish the year with the Twins the year before. So we're not used to giving multiple years. But do you think the fact that Odorizzi has 2 years and I want to say 18 or so left on his contract's a big deal? Because the Twins have no payroll next year other than basically Pineda and a couple other guys.
It'll be even less than that. It's the last year of arbitration. So $6 million this year, next year will probably be. It depends on how he pitches. I mean, guys don't go backwards from that. If he pitches poorly, that would obviously not be good. But you're probably looking at anywhere from $9 to $10 million. So 2 years and $16 million for a guy who can shore up the back end of your rotation. I mean, isn't that pretty close to what Jason Vargas got from the Royals, or not the Royals? Excuse me, the Mets. I mean, so you're looking at the kind of money that teams are throwing to guys who are even way less interesting than this. And so totally legit move. You're seeing, the multi-year deal to Addison Reed, who I think it came down to his years being reasonable. I don't think they wanted to give a 3 or 4 year deal to any reliever, and that's totally justifiable. How many of those deals have come back and hurt teams? I mean, Tony Sipp signing a 3-year deal, Antonio Bastardo, those guys are not multi-year relievers. You sign your lefties to 1-year deals or you develop them like Taylor Rogers. And so I just think that the path that they've taken makes sense. You're also seeing them trade from strengths. Palacios was a perfectly reasonable prospect, but behind, obviously, Royce Lewis, Wander Javier, Nick Gordon, a number of shortstops in that system. And not only that, but you also see them kind of weeding out maybe some of the Terry Ryan guys that they just weren't as high on as maybe Terry Ryan and his previous regime were. And so it's not because they're trying to gut the system that Terry put together. In fact, look at this current team. It's pretty much a Terry Ryan built team with a few tweaks here and there. And so it's just when you see them trade prospects, it's very interesting to look at is it guys that they've brought in, or is it guys that were brought in by the previous regime? Now, granted, you can't trade too many draft picks right away as far as, like, it used to be 1 year after they signed. Now it's the end of the season. So if they wanted to trade Royce Lewis right now, they could. Under the old rules with the CBA, they would have had to wait until this upcoming June, a year from when he signed. Now, with that said, though, they're not moving any of their own guys. They're moving some of Terry's guys. So that's another dynamic that I like to keep an eye on as far as, restructuring, just like when they hired new front office people, new coaches, and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point. They're kind of doing a mixture of, their guys plus Terry Ryan's guys. It seems like a lot of the Terry Ryan guys are kind of the players on the field, whereas the Falvey Levine guys, so to speak, are the front office guys. Because the Twins hired I was at Twins Fest, and I heard Dave St. Peter say something similar to the fact that the Twins have hired like 40 new people in their analytics front office department. So you might not be seeing it on the field, but you'll definitely see it in the analytics aspect of it.
Well, I think it speaks to the ability of Falvey and Levine to understand the parts that don't, or that just else. And to go from there, I don't
Hello?
done a nice job with that.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I can barely hear you, man. I can barely hear you on my end. Let's move on, though, and let's talk about what do you think was the key move in the offseason in terms of a free agent signing or trade?
Well, I mean, I would say Reed, because they have insurance now on Fernando Rodney if Father Time, who is undefeated, comes back to bite them. You know what I mean? And so Reed has obviously the pedigree of having closed before, which is a big deal to a lot of people. And, you don't want to throw a guy like Hildenberger in there without having any experience whatsoever in the ninth inning. And so they've done a nice job to kind of hedge their bets there. But I also think Michael Pineda could be really, really useful because he's a thoroughbred, just an absolute horse physically. And if they get him to where he doesn't give up so many home runs, he could be a sneaky pickup for them as well.
Absolutely, yeah. He had a 17 strikeout game, I want to say Mother's Day weekend of this past year before he got hurt against the Orioles in Yankee Stadium, and he was just killing it. His slider was biting. He said at Twins Fest his slider was biting better than it ever did at any point in his career during that day. So I agree. I think Addison Reed was probably the biggest pickup of the offseason because it shifts everybody down. He can do the high leverage situations. He's pitched in New York. He's pitched in Boston. So he's not going to be intimidated at all by the Yankees and the Red Sox and things like that. So I agree. I think that was the most important move of the offseason. Dustin Morse today put out the Minnesota Twins spring training roster. I just want to kind of run through a couple names with you. I want you to give me a yes or no as to whether they will be on the opening day roster.
Yo.
John Curtis.
No. Not because he doesn't deserve it, but no.
Kenneth Vargas.
No. I think they get rid of him. I think they find a bat.
Phil Hughes.
No. I think he's going to be on the DL.
Zach Littell.
No. But he'll be one of the first names they call up when they need an arm.
Tyler Kinley, who was their Rule 5 pick.
I feel like a broken record, but no, I don't think he meets it. If they want, they can work out a trade, but I don't think it happens.
Okay. Anibal Sanchez.
Yes, I do think he'll be their number 5 starter to open the year. I think Mejia gets sent back to AAA for a little while, and Gibson is the number 4, and that's assuming they sign somebody, and I think they will. I said on the pod yesterday, I think that this is them playing possum I think they're saying, well, we got a pretty full rotation, is their way of saying, we're just waiting out the market. If these guys come down to our price range, we're going to be all over it. So I think they're playing possum.
Yeah, I agree. I think they end up with Lance Lynn personally.
Good.
Dietrich ends.
No, but he's interesting because look at his numbers in the minors. They are really good. He needs to keep that shoulder healthy because he can help them, whether it's as a reliever or as like a back-end starter. It'll be fun to watch where he ends up.
This guy's an interesting name to me. I've always thought that he should have had a lot more success than he has. Aaron Slegers.
No, but I find him interesting because he's got some Chris Young in terms of height, but he also gets grounders. So he's interesting. Out of the bullpen, maybe he throws gas, which would also be interesting. As a starter, I find him a little less so. But he's, again, one of those guys where if they need a start or two here or there, he's going to be, along with Felix Jorge, the first guys they call up for spot duty.
Yes or no? Does Steven Gonzalez make his major league debut this year?
Yeah, I don't know if it's in the first half, but it does happen this year.
Same question, Brent Rooker.
Yes. We said that on, I think I wrote that or said Locked On Twins somewhere. Yeah, I think they find a way to get him up here, whether it's if they need DH help or if maybe they, want to have him mix and match in the outfield a little bit.
Royce Lewis on the opening day 2019 Twins, true or false?
2020 I'm going to go with, which I think is the same path as Joe Mauer. So I think 2020, opening day 2020, but not 2019.
Okay. All right, perfect. We're going to switch gears here, and we are going to talk a little Hall of Fame. So the Hall of Fame ballots were released, and one former Twin was on there, and that was Jack Morris. You and I are both native Minnesotans. We're roughly the same age. I'm assuming that you probably hold the 91 World Series, specifically Game 7 and his 10-inning shutout of the Braves in very high regard as maybe possibly the greatest pitched World Series game of all time, and that does include Don Larson's no-hitter. He's always had kind of a, I guess, crusty or surly reputation with the media, especially when he was a player. He made some very, derogatory comments towards a female reporter and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But as a player, do you think he should have gotten in before this? And what was your reaction to Jack Morris finally getting into the Hall of Fame via the Veterans Committee?
Maybe unpopular, but I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I just think he's thoroughly average. A 3.90 ERA in that era, and I know he claims to have pitched to the score and all that stuff, but it falls flat for me. They say he's the pitcher of the 80s, but Roger Clemens was arguably as good. Nolan Ryan was as good in the 80s, and those guys are both much, much better pitchers. Roger Clemens actually has the highest WAR among pitchers of all time, which I just realized recently. I had no idea that was the case. So he's not a Hall of Famer for me, and it's not particularly close, but I still think he was a ridiculously good pitcher in that 91 game. I can't imagine the nerves I would have had if I was watching it as an adult person. I was 5 at the time, so I didn't start watching the Twins until 1993, which is pretty much the worst possible year you could start. But
right.
Yeah, I would have been a bundle of nerves. I remember game 163 in 2009, and how I was just a basket case for that whole game, and that would have been so much worse for the World Series 18 years before that. So, no, I don't think Jack is a Hall of Famer, but you know what? Since he got in, it's exciting because anytime someone from Minnesota does something like that, it's obviously noteworthy to people like us who've spent all or most all of our lives in Minnesota. And so, cheers to him. I'm not going to besmirch the Hall or him. If I was voting, would not have checked his name.
Now, you look at the Twins who are in the Hall of Fame, and I'm talking specifically the native Minnesotans. The top 3 names are pretty impressive. It's Jack Morris, Dave Winfield, and Paul Molitor. So Minnesota's doing something right. I mean, we may not be nationally recognized as, the state of baseball like we are the state of hockey, but those are three of the best players of all time, so we're doing something right.
Yeah, and you could add Joe Mauer hopefully someday too, and I don't know. I mean, it's pretty amazing that guys come in from the cold and put on different gear than hockey. Some of these kids playing hockey all summer long at camps and stuff too. It's pretty amazing that we have time for anything else. But hey, we'll keep 3 Hall of Famers and a possible 4th one in the span of about 40 years. That's pretty impressive. I mean, in fact, they'd all be voted in within the span of about 20 or 25 years. That's even better.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that. I wanted to kind of segue into that. Obviously, Joe Mauer's a shoo-in for the Twins Hall of Fame. He's been the face of the franchise since he got drafted in 2001. True or false, Joe Mauer will be in the Baseball Hall of Fame someday, either via the regular vote, the Veterans Committee, etc. True or false, he will be in the Hall of Fame.
Oh man, I'm gonna say true. I think enough of the national voters value his time as a catcher and how great of a hitter he was in that position, and how tough it is for the that sustainability. It's difficult to be a catcher and hit like that for any period of time, and he did manage to bounce back last year to close enough to who he was before that I think you could give him some bump for that, because concussions, man, they're just nasty. So I think he gets in.
Yeah, I agree completely. He's the only catcher to ever win 3 batting titles. He has a lifetime combined WAR of over 100. And yeah, I agree. I think he gets in. Especially the fact that he spent most of his career, he's got over 1,500 hits as a catcher. I think that the fact that he's transitioned into first base doesn't deter or deteriorate from his legacy. In fact, like you said, I think it helps the fact that he came back. I want to say he hit like 305 last year. So he's much like John Cena is in the WWE. He's a very polarizing figure among Twins fans. They either love him or hate them. There is no middle.
Yeah, nobody's meh on Joe Mauer. It's love or hate.
Absolutely. Let's have a little bit of fun here. Let's switch topics. Let's talk a little wrestling, man. You and I are both wrestling fans. So Monday Night Raw happens last night, and they had a match that went an hour, 45 minutes, and 55 seconds. It was like a 7-man elimination, or a 7-man gauntlet match. An hour and 45 minutes? Are you kidding me?
Well, I remember growing up, they had the Iron Man matches with like Shawn Michaels and was it Razor Ramon? I can't remember, but like Bret Hart. They'd have Bret Hart, and those guys would wrestle for an hour, and it was most pinfalls in an hour. So I can't imagine that long and that length. And even with that many guys, I mean, still the physical endurance it takes to wrestle for 20 minutes is amazing. And you look at the TV matches. I'm a fan of the late '90s stuff, especially. TV matches were anywhere from, Goldberg would be 30 seconds and Bret Hart would be 10, 15 minutes. And, that would be the really great matches. An hour plus is just staggering, just absolutely staggering. I have to imagine those guys couldn't even walk afterward.
Oh, I can imagine, especially when you have a guy like Braun Strowman in the match. I mean, like you said, not so much only the length of the match, but the physicality in the match. You had, Roman Reigns and John Cena and Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman and all these guys just physically beating on each other, and the Miz and the Miztourage and you have all these elements going on. It took over half the show to do that one match.
Yeah, you have to write some impressive storyline there, or you have to give credit to a lot of these guys call out the match as it's going on, like their spots. They do their internal wrestling communication where they know what moves are coming and when and all that stuff. Bret Hart's book actually really does a good job of explaining that. If you have a match with a guy, you might rehearse the entire thing, Or you might have just two guys who are just artists and technicians. So to engineer a match of that magnitude is just stunning. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is, and you know, it was almost a pay-per-view level match, which kind of made I was kind of surprised to see that it was on a Monday Night Raw event. I mean, especially 6 days from now on WWE Network, for which if you don't have it, listeners should subscribe. It's only $9.99 a month, but you're 6 days away from a pay-per-view, so I understand the building towards the pay-per-view in a big way because we are on the road to WrestleMania, but at the same time, you don't want to give that match away when that match could possibly overshadow the actual Elimination Chamber match.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Goldberg won at Georgia Dome back in '98 over Hogan, and it was like, this should have been a pay-per-view match, and that was back when PPVs were $30-$40 a month. You know, now at $9.99, and everybody's got the network, or most people have the network when they're watching these things. It may be a little different. You know, not worried about buy rates as much, but man alive, I tell you, if they're giving that away for free, that's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely, and kudos, like you said, the athletic ability it takes to do a 20-minute match, let alone go an hour and 45 minutes with Roman Reigns, John Cena, Seth Rollins, and the Braun Strowman. I mean, it's the monster among men. I mean, just being in there that long with that guy, that's impressive, and it's scary, and it was a hell of an entertaining match, I'll tell you that. Well,
now I'm gonna have to go back and watch it because I missed out. I haven't been good about the stuff lately. It's been classic stuff I've been keeping an eye on, but now I got to go check it out.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'm right there with you, man. I watch an episode of Nitro or two per night, or I'll just throw an old In Your House pay-per-view on. I actually just watched the Shawn Michaels Undertaker Hell in a Cell match from '96 or '97 when
nice.
Yeah, that match, and that was like a year or two before the infamous Mankind Undertaker Hell in a Cell match, but that was just as brutal too. Especially, you know, back then seeing Shawn Michaels, who was kind of the premier wrestler in that era, seeing him bruised and beaten, and more important, bloody. He bleeds throughout that entire match very heavily. It was a lot of fun to watch.
And that's not long before he has the back injury that he had to retire from for 5 years or something like that. I mean, that's some serious stuff.
Yeah, and that was right about the time he started taking painkillers, and he had that painkiller addiction.
Ugh.
And then, yeah, he loses the title to Austin at 14 with Mike Tyson turning on DX, and then and that gave him a storyline to get Shawn out and hopefully get his life turned around, and he did, and he had back surgery, and he became a born-again Christian.
They gave Triple H the group too, didn't they?
Yeah, they gave Triple H DX, and that was right before X-Pac debuted, and they had the New Age Outlaws and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it
early
was
'98.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, man, I have a buddy that I work with. He's a diehard wrestling fan, and we were talking the other night and just saying, man, we miss the Attitude Era so much. Like, there's a lot of good, entertaining wrestlers in this era right now, and they put on what storylines they can, given kind of what society dictates and how they feel, what direction the country's going. But man, do we miss the Attitude Era.
Yeah, it's, they want parents to feel okay bringing their 8-year-olds to the shows, but at the same time, I don't know, those 8-year-olds aren't paying very many salaries, are they?
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, they're buying a hell of a lot of John Cena merchandise, it seems like.
Yeah, Fruity Pebbles, man.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears here. Let's have a little bit of fun here. So I came up with this idea kind of off the cuff last night. I'm going to give you a couple of Twins players, and I want you to tell me what character from The Office they would be. Now, The Office is one of the shows that you and I just absolutely love. I think you're also, like me, you're a 30 Rock and Parks and Rec fan. So,
yep, that whole block from NBC Thursday nights was huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give you a couple of guys on the current roster, and I just want you to tell me kind of who you think what office character they would be. We're going to do this. Let's start with Brian Dozier.
Brian Dozier would probably be Jim. Who did you have?
Yeah. Honestly, I had Brian Dozier being a little bit of Ryan. He's kind of really out. Yep. He's got that outgoing personality, and he's really funny and things like that. But you also kind of, you can kind of tell he's got a little bit of prankster to him. This one, I really want to see who you say. Burt Blyleven.
That's Todd Packer. No question about it. That's Todd Packer.
Absolutely, 100%. I completely agree with you. This is one of the ones that I think is most interesting, and I actually had kind of a difficult time coming up for a comp with this one. Eddie Guardado.
Oh man, that would have been a good Todd Packer one. Eddie Guardado is. Oh man, maybe Andy Bernard. I don't know. I would say something like Andy Bernard, but also Todd Packer because he's got a very long prankster streak to him. They are constantly messing with people.
Absolutely, and keeping the bullpen loose and keeping the guys laughing because out in the bullpen it can get to be a long game. Want to kind of flip it here. Twins player or Twins coach, do you think is most like Creed Bratton?
Oh man,
who's the Creed Bratton of the Minnesota Twins?
Creed is just so quirky. Oh, man, that's a good one. I wanted to say Paul Molitor, but I'm not sure because, Molitor's got that streak of, rocker in him. He's a big Springsteen fan and kind of the rockers of his era when he was playing. But, oh, man, Creed just kind of can show up and not know who anybody is, but just be there. It would have been like Mike Pelfrey back in the day.
Okay.
Pelfrey's super nice, but people said he didn't know who anybody was, which is really funny.
Right. We got about 6 and some change left. I came up with this one. I want to, for me, the most obvious Minnesota Twins, the office comparison player character, Joe Mauer is Toby Flenderson.
Yeah, he's got almost a voice too. If you really, really get down to it, it's people just loathe Joe Mauer like they do Michael with Toby. Just oh yes, Toby. Just annoyed with him, which I get it.
Yeah, and like you said too, much like Joe Mauer, John Cena, people like that, they either love Toby or they hate Toby. They either love Mauer or they hate Mauer. They love Cena, they hate Cena. There's no in between. But fans
very
tend
unassuming and good at their job too.
Absolutely, and very, very kind of underappreciated. When you have a guy like Michael Scott who's kind of taking all the ideas and kind of running with them in a crazy, absurd way, and you have, really loud vocal kind of guys, that voice kind of off in the background is often Toby Flenderson, and that's what a lot of people say that Joe Mauer's been. He's kind of been the he's not a vocal leader. I think you've got a lot of access to the Twins guys in the locker room. None of them ever say Joe Mauer goes out there and gives them a rah-rah speech or anything like that. He just kind of goes out, takes care of his business, and leads by example. And Toby's kind of that same way. They're very kind of, I guess you would say, vanilla, bland, and ordinary, but they're both very good at their jobs, very unassuming, and I think that one works really well.
Well, and the guy that plays him is Paul Lieberstein. He writes some of the episodes and directs them too. So it is funny how apt that comparison is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's do one more here. Who would Eduardo Escobar be? Because Eddie is one of my favorites. He's hilarious. Who would Eduardo Escobar be?
Michael Scott. Yep.
I can see that.
He's the class clown. He's the one that riles everybody up and gets everybody going. I think he's got to be Michael Scott.
Absolutely. All right, we got about some 4 and change left. This podcast, obviously, it's a baseball podcast. We've talked about baseball. We've talked about the Twins. We've talked about wrestling. But you and I are both dads. We both have daughters under a year old. Man, how amazing is it to just be a dad and just see your daughter grow?
Really can't imagine anything better. And I went through periods where I wasn't sure, like in my 20s, where I'm like, well, kids would be nice, but I don't know. Other people's kids I'm not crazy about. I don't have these feelings of like, oh yeah, I need one of these when I see someone else's kid. But when it's your own,
right.
it just flips the script on you. You can't imagine life without them. You can't remember life before them, and there's just nothing better. And I think we're about 4 months apart in age for the girls, because Harper was born in May and Josie was born in September or October?
October 11th. Yeah.
Okay, so 5 months. And so to see the stages you're at is like, yeah, I can kind of remember that. 5 months is an eternity when they're only 5 or 10, 9 months old. So it
right.
feels like an eternity, but at the same time too, you remember when they didn't have any hair and now you're brushing their hair, or when they couldn't crawl and now you can't stop them, and it just goes so fast. And so you kind of have to slow yourself down and just remember that, if you're struggling with something, it's not going to be like this forever, and also you're going to wish that you had it back. So don't get too wound up, don't get too upset, just kind of live in the moment.
Absolutely. And it's so true that, when you're a kid, time flies really fast. When you're an adult, you can go to work hard. 8 hours later, you look at the clock, and it's 12:03, and you started at 12 o'clock. Time slows down when you're an adult. But then it seems like when you get home and you be a dad or you be a parent, it's like, man, that time just flies by. I mean, like you said, Josie, my daughter Josie, she's already she's a little over 4 months old, and Harper is 9 months old. Where'd that time go, man? I remember following you guys on Facebook and seeing that she was born, and then it's like 9 months later. It's like, holy cow, man. Yep,
she's already been out as long as she was in. It's kind of our little joke, She cooked for 9 and she's been out for 9, or she's cooked for 40 and she's out for 40. It's amazing, but I tell you what, man, it never stops. It keeps, it's crawling, and now it'll be walking soon, and first birthdays and all that. It's just nuts.
It is. All right, well, we got to wrap this up here. We got about 90 seconds left. I want to give you a chance to do one last promotion for the stuff that you're working on, as well as your personal Twitter, any Instagram, or any social media that you want to pitch out there. So you've got 1 minute left, sir.
You got it. Follow me at Brandon_Warne. People can find me on Facebook, either my personal or my professional page. Working on some prospect stuff for zone coverage. Hopefully go up today. Some Timberwolves stuff too. And so just check me out on Twitter, and from there you can find my work on the athletic zone coverage and all that stuff. And we keep it pretty simple. So just check me out on Twitter, and from there you'll find everything I'm doing.
And that's Brandon_Warne, WARNE, just in case everybody is wondering. Brandon, I cannot thank you enough personally and professionally for coming on my podcast, giving me an hour of your time today. I know you got to go. You got your own Locked On podcast to do. I appreciate it so much, man, and we'll do it again sometime in season.
Thank you, bud. We'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks, pal. Yep. Bye. That was Brandon Warne with many different things. Follow him on Twitter. Thank you guys very much. This episode was episode 13 with Brandon Warne. The show about the show. We'll see you again soon.